Blazor has a major issue, an issue I thought would be fixed with the coming of .NET 8, but actually become even more common, because .NET 8 now has that new Blazor Web App Template, which enables pre-rendering by default. With pre-rendering enabled, the server is now responsible for initially rendering the page content of your web app. This is an initial static rendering of your web app, so none of the interactivity, and it does so as quickly as possible, and that also benefits your SEO. Since, as you may know, the downside of building single-page client-side applications is that they have terrible SEO. And what else? With the Blazor WebAssembly applications, you may need to wait for the app to fully load, so that initial server-side static rendering gives the user instant display or an instant visual, so improves the user experience slightly. So now the server renders the initial static version of the website, and afterwards the WebAssembly or the server-side interactivity kicks in and triggers a re-render. This makes that the user visiting your web application may see your website rendered twice. So it's gonna be visible and then get a white flash and the new content once the interactivity kicks in. Also, if there's some data being fetched or some whatever, that those calls are going to happen twice. So the server side does the HTTP calls, for example, to the database to get some data to display in the initial render. Then once the interactivity kicks in, it may happen again because it re-renders that component, and let's say the HTTP calls happen in the onInitialized async method, then that method is going to be called twice. We can't really solve it. Like, we can't say, well, you could turn off the pre-rendering, but that's not what we'll want to do because we need that SEO. If there are components or pages on which you don't require the SEO, the improved SEO or the improved user experience, then you could simply turn off that pre-rendering on component level or on page level. So that would be an example of turning the pre-render mode off. So on your component, whatever the component is named, add render mode equals new either WebAssembly or server render mode, and you can pass pre-render to false. Or you could do it globally by applying that render mode on your routes and your head outlet. There is talk about moving most of your pages into the server project to have it statically rendered, the pages, and then have the components in the WebAssembly project or the client project, let's say, and have those with an interactive mode. So the assumption would be then that when the static page, well, the server loads the page, that the GET requests, like you're getting some data from the database and you're building your page with that data, that would be included for improving the SEO. And then all the components that need interactivity to turn those into components, so all of the buttons and so on, and move that into the client project and only give those the interactivity mode. It's a cool idea. It involves quite some work to make that split, and I'm not convinced that that is a solution, since you would be getting the data on initialized async, for example, but then you need to fill up a local property on your component, so a local state, let's say, and then you would need to access the properties of that object. Let's say it's a class object with a name, an email, and some user info. You would need to bind that to the HTML, so to the Razor layout, which my assumption would be that once you fill that variable, that local state variable, that usually in the interactive mode, that usually triggers a re-render to update the Razor, well, the UI, what the user sees. When interactivity is not enabled, my assumption would be that that re-render is not going to happen. You're going to fetch the data from the database and then just nothing happens. But I could be wrong, since pre-rendering is also an initial serve done by the server, an initial render done by the server, and that does actually include the data of the GET request. So we'll have to experiment with that. The recommended approach would be to use the PersistComponentState, which you could compare to some kind of caching. So once that initial render happens and it has fetched the data, it's going to keep that in maybe in the browser storage or in memory. And then once the interactivity kicks in, you can take out that stored data. And this way we're preventing a double HTTP call or fetching data from the database, because we already have it. We're simply taking it out of the storage, local, let's say local storage of the browser or memory. We're not touching the database anymore, and that also makes that the data doesn't change. And usually a data change on the local state on a component triggers a re-render. So that should be prevented now. But that's an assumption I'm going to make, that once the WASM kicks in, the WebAssembly kicks in, the interactivity kicks in, either WebAssembly or server, the WebSockets, that doesn't force a re-render, even though the data didn't change. So that's an assumption. And then an extra, a last approach could be, but it's not that good, but because it's a bit similar like turning off the pre-rendering, it's also gonna hurt your SEO. But when a component loads statically, there's going to be two lifecycle methods occurring. So on initialized parameter set, or the async version, of course. But what is not happening is OnAfterRender, since there's no interactivity, there's no re-rendering happening. So let's say you want to get data that you don't need included for your SEO. Could be after a user authenticates with your application, some private data, let's say. Then you could just simply fetch that, do that HTTP call, interact with the database only after render async. So this means that this only happens once the WebAssembly or the WebSockets kicks in. Once that interactivity kicks in, only then that method is going to get triggered. So this one is never touched when rendering in that initial static rendering. I'll quickly demonstrate the double rendering issues on my own website, which is in .NET 8. I actually thought .NET 8 kind of solved it because it wasn't bothering me as much as it used to be before .NET 8. And for some reason, I thought that auto render mode that initially renders server-side, even server-side interactivity until the WebAssembly loads. But for some reason, I thought that transition would have handled this double rendering issue. In the network tab, you'll see the first entry of type document and that's that initial render. And let's, no. And in the response, the entire HTML with the static resources, and they even include those comment sections, which tells us that those sections are pre-rendered. So anything within the head outlet, and then anything within the routes component. So that makes most of the content is there, but not the actual blog posts. We could take a preview. So you'll see the recent content section. It's actually where the blog posts should be loaded. Why that isn't loaded is because I mentioned those are only loaded after I authorized, which the authorization only happens in the OnAfterRender, because that needs to interact with the local browser storage, which requires a JavaScript interop method, which is only possible in the client side once the interactivity kicked in. So in the client side render, the client rendered version of the web application. So, but you could say that's important. I agree to have those included. But what's most important to me is these detail pages. They really need to have that SEO, because if those didn't have the SEO, then yeah, I might as well just have the client-side single-page application. Let's refresh without the paint flashing, and you see it's loading twice. So once it's the document. So let's see, and now the blog post content should be included. We'll also see that in the HTML. All of these code blocks are there. Okay. And then once the Blazor Web.js becomes active, well, interactivity kicks in, .NET.js, all those, the runtimes are loaded and so on, then another fetch happens. So the actual HTTP call, client-side HTTP call from the single page app to the API, to the database, and that's just calling an actual HTTP call, and then with that data, once that's fetched, then the re-render happens and make sure that the component displays the content. So what I'll try next is on this page, so on initialized async, this is going to fetch the blog post content, and that now happens twice because of the initial render, and then once the interactivity kicks in, that initialized async is called again. So I'm going to try to use this PersistComponentState Implementation to prevent the call from happening twice. Another website I have is leisure.com, which also suffers the issue, but as you may have seen, you barely notice the re-render, the double render. So that's why I actually thought it was gone, but that's not the case. These dogs are loaded in a random order, so each time I refresh, you should see different dogs. Let's see that, and we're going to see the change twice. So we've got a Stafford or Pitbull kind. Let's refresh, we see another, and then we see a Shepherd. So that's loaded twice. So now I'm going to take this code from the official Microsoft docs and attempt to mold it into my solution. There's a couple of things I don't understand right away, and that's this: why would we be registering before trying to take it out? I would try to take it out. If it's null, I would be persisting it. Another question, why do I even need this subscription state? Seems like we're only using the application state, really. And I want to implement this into a class and not really into a component or into a Razor file. So let's see if we can make it work. My brand website version 2. If you don't have a copy of this product, you can get one on gizcode.com/products or on Patreon/gizstupid/shop. I'm likely also going to put the code for the persisting component state into one of my NuGet packages, which you can get for free on gizcode.com. Okay, so in my modular brand website setup, let's take a look at the SPA, the blog, the detail page, which includes a component, get blog post for slug, and then once it's fetched from the database and so on, it fills up the page and the metadata tags. Let's look at that. What that does is, on parameter set, if the slug is set, it's going to initialize the selected blog posts, which means if we already have it, just return it. Otherwise, fetch it from. Okay, this would be my first solution. Simply created a class PersistState, made it abstract to inherit from. I passed down as a primary constructor, passed down the persistent component state, the app state, so application state. Now we're using that app state to try take from. If there's some stored data, return it. If not, fetch the new one using the method we passed in here. So that could be fetch blog post for slug. And then only after we've got the new data, I'm going to persist it as JSON and return the new data. This seems to work pretty fine. So I then inherited from PersistState, the class we just saw, also using a primary constructor to pass that app state to the base class. Then in the HTTP client, in my, let's see, we got get blog post for slug. If we see init selected blog post, if we go in there, if we already for some reason have the blog post in memory, we're just going to return it. This is not applicable to the double rendering issue. This is applicable when we already loaded the application and we're just navigating from away from the blog page and then back to the blog page, so we don't have to fetch it again. So ignore that. Then, so we don't have anything in memory, so we're actually on our first render or second render. Then we're going to use that persist state, that fetch or add method, pass down the type of the result we're expecting, blog post response, the key, and then passing the fetch blog post. So what it used to do before, it used to be just a wait get blog post for slug with a request, and that simply does an HTTP call to the API, which gets that from the database. And that seems to be working just fine. So let's get the paint flashing on. The disable cache is off for now, just to see the result. So we've got this. Let's refresh. It's like, yeah, there's no white flash. Let's say we take a look at the document. So the initial render, we do get our blog post, so that's good. And then below, after all of the Blazor and .NET runtime and everything loaded, we should see, we used to see another HTTP call. to get the blog content, but it's not here because this is not that. This is for the sponsor segment, and this is for the email subscriber count, is for the newsletter. So I would expect, well, before there used to be an extra HTTP call in there. If we go to fetch HTTP, there's none. Now, if I do disable cache, we are going to see that flash. That's because this banner image, for some reason, yeah, it's no longer getting cached by the browser, so the image reloads. Let's see. Yeah, so there you saw it, but the data is not getting fetched again. So maybe we're seeing a slight re-render, but it's instant because we already have the data this time. We don't have to get it from the database. So this looks a bit like caching, right? Just preventing to hit the database again. If we, well, talking about caching, let's see why we see the flash, because we did disable cache in the browser, and we see this brand website cover image, this one, once, and then we see it twice. Because the first time it's loaded for that pre-rendering, and the second time there is some re-rendering going on still, I assume. It's not doing the extra HTTP call, but it does seem to re-render this or reload that image tag at least. So this is what I mentioned in the beginning, that I was afraid that we're not really going to resolve the double rendering issue, but we are going to decrease the amount of HTTP calls. I'll put this class into a NuGet package, and by now you know where to find my NuGet packages by going to kisco.com, signing up, and they'll end up in your mailbox. Do check out the products as well if you want to have access to the entire brand website v2, so my own kisco.com website with a ton of features. You can get them kisco.com/products or in my Patreon KisStupid shop. Let's do a small improvement. Let's do it like that. If new data is for some reason null, which can actually happen, would assume in the exception case, then we're just not going to persist it. And let's quickly look at the blog page. Which has a component, but it's only getting the blog posts once we're authorized. So if I'm an administrator, I can see the draft as well. If I'm not, I won't see the drafts. But this authorized layout uses alt state change. Let's see, and this one only starts the authentication process on OnAfterRenderAsync first render, so once the interactivity kicked in, because this one needs to access the JavaScript interop, or at least the let's see, init auth tokens, the local storage get items async, which uses the JavaScript interop to get the authentication tokens from the browser's local storage. And that's the reason why you don't see any pre-rendering for these blog posts, because they're only rendered after going through. As you can see here, the recent content is empty. Then the last thing I could experiment with is creating a new Blazor Web App. So the setup would be moving the home page to server side, and this is the weather dummy component. Let's also move that. The main layout lives in the client, which concerns me a little bit. Let's put that there. Import statement clients.pages. Let's go to the app and maybe remove these render modes. So now we're no longer, so now we're supposed to be static. And then on the home weather, we're not going to add interactivity, but then on this render mode equals interactive, could choose auto or WebAssembly. So the idea here is that getting the data, so ideally from a database, would happen and would just statically be displayed. So we're getting that SEO, and then only the counter component is the component that needs interactivity, which maybe should be the only thing that to be re-rendered once the interactivity kicks in. Okay, now this routes component is also in the client. Let's move that over. Pages, main layout. Okay. So the approach we're trying now, there's potentially a few components that we can't use. Okay, so I messed up the layout, ignore this. This is not wrong. Counter does work, so the interactivity kicked in after a while. Let's now just see what happens. So we've got random values. 36. Okay, let's see. So we're getting our initial render with temperature of 91. So on. We're not gonna see an HTTP call because we're not really doing one. But what could have happened is that this went twice. Let's quickly replace that with an HTTP call. A JSON placeholder of posts. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to try to add some randomness. We have to add HTTP client, and that still seems to work fine. Let's see. So I've just added some division. Counter works. This is 225. Our caching is on. Let's leave it off. 478, and it doesn't change, although it's random. We're doing the initial 478, and then see if there's any HTTP quests. No, doesn't seem to be the case. So yeah, this may be also a solution. So for getting the data, we're just using static render mode. And then for interactivity, we have that separate on the component itself. So the only thing we would need to check is, can these components share the same scoped services? They may get registered twice. Once in the server and once in the client. Well, maybe not necessary in the client, since only if the interactive component needs it. But whatever the interactive component needs, likely you may need to have to register in the server side as well, which is double. And how are you going to, let's say, now the counter needs to change the weather data or something, or access it. How are you going to pass that? So I'm going to make a placeholder HTTP client. Okay, so I put this placeholder HTTP client in the client project. Simply one method init posts, which fills a property posts by calling that JSON placeholder API. Oh, it's in the weather component. using http.post, so the property on there to use to display. I have to register this HTTP client, not multiple users getting the same version, the same app. Let's now see if we can get the same state. Just gonna add a uninitialized. Let's set the current count to the first random of these HTTP posts. Now I injected it in the client, but I didn't register it in the program CS. Let's see what that gives. Assume an error. Seems to work fine. The current count is set to the first random. There's no register service for placeholder HTTP client. Yeah, that's what I thought. So we could, but it does work. Okay, I had another error telling me it couldn't resolve the HTTP client within the HTTP placeholder HTTP client. And now if I go to the app, it kind of doesn't work anymore. Okay, so it's still happening. I now registered as transient and singleton just to see, but there's clearly something wrong, and I assume it's because of the double registration of the placeholder HTTP client, which if we don't do that, it's complaining in the console. Anyway, I'm gonna leave it at that. I'm not sure if this is the approach you'll want to go. We could maybe now also add the persist component state on top of that. Anyhow, there seems to be some merit in the story of splitting pages to get all the pages just getting data into the server project, and all the rest that needs interactivity and does post calls or put calls, like, well, it's likely gonna be interactive forms or whatever. Then you could leave those in the client project, and then sharing that state, it's gonna be a little tricky, I think. But maybe it's a way to go. I'm not gonna go this route. I prefer to just have the server project solely for pre-rendering, and then the client project for everything really. You know where to find my projects and NuGet packages. I'll make sure to drop that. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.